Today we are mixing two things together that players absolutely hate. We're mixing Storm with a little bit of extra turns. Now there's only one extra turn spell in this deck, but it is Nexus of Fate. So when your goal is to cast as many enchantments as possible, draw as many cards as possible to cast Nexus of Fate every single turn, it might make some people salty, but don't worry, we're going to be able to kill them pretty quickly because this deck can make their creatures absolutely massive and be able to one-shot our opponents pretty easily. So let's get right into it after you guys click on that whatnot link. Claim your free $15. Additionally, you guys can get 10% off all of your Tolarian Library proxies whenever you use code DT4D. I'm not sponsored with Baron of Dice. This means you guys can get 5% off whenever you guys use the code DT4D or click the link in the description down below. I'm a huge fan of the awesome art on their deck boxes and just the way they look in general, and you can pair up those awesome deck boxes with high quality playmats that match those deck boxes. Thank you, Baron of Dice, for sponsoring this channel. Let's read this guy. First off, the reason I'm making this deck is because he got some awesome art, and I'm a sucker for just massive dragons that look amazing, and this card's Monster Hunter art is a big dragon that looks amazing, so that's why we're building him today, and we're going to make this deck pretty disgusting. This is a 6 CMC creature, 3 generic, 1 green, 1 white, 1 blue, and whenever another permanent you control enters, look at the top card of your library. If it shares a card type with that permanent, you may reveal that card and put it into your hand. So essentially, a land enters the battlefield. If we look and we see a land, we get to put that land into our hand. So the goal is to make as many of our permanents match typings as possible, and to do that we're kind of doing an enchantment theme. Even our creatures have the enchantment theme, and that's a solid way you can just up your odds of getting to the ability to put that card directly into your hand, is not only making them enchantments but also making them enchantment creatures. So dual typings are going to be amazing here. This was originally going to be an artifact build because it's really good. All of your spells can be artifacts. You can even play artifact lands. But then I quickly lost interest when I realized Sensei's Divining Top just goes infinite with this guy the second you can reduce its cost by 1. Because what's going to happen is Sensei's Divining Top is going to enter the battlefield. It's an artifact, and then you can go ahead and trigger Sensei's Divining Top to put it back on top of your library, and then you will draw it with his ability. So 1 cost reducer with Sensei's Divining Top, and you can just draw your entire library. After that, I was like, that kind of looks like an A plus B combo, and I'm not too into those, so we just kind of shelved the artifact build and we are going straight into enchantments. And I'm kind of glad I did, because not only are we able to storm off, there's also a lot of possibilities where we can just outright commander damage people out because this guy gets so massive so quickly. So let's get right into it. Before we get into the storm aspect of this deck and how we're able to just kind of keep casting spell after spell without running out of mana resources, we need to talk about top deck manipulation. The more you can manipulate the top of your library, the more odds you are to trigger his ability, and his ability is what's broken here. Not only is this going to pair amazingly with all of our Enchantress presence effects, whenever we're casting an enchantment or whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield, we get to draw a card. Additionally, that's going to trigger our commanders. So this is kind of going to be a deck where whenever you cast one spell, 9 times out of 10, 2 more cards are going to get put into your hand, and that's where the power is, and that's what we're really going to focus on. But to do that, we need to manipulate the top of our library. One of the best cards in the deck for manipulating the top card of our library is Ancestral Knowledge. Super unique to this commander, I would say, but it is just a solid card. This is a 2 CMC enchantment, 1 generic, 1 blue, has a cumulative upkeep of 1, and whenever Ancestral Knowledge comes into play, you may look at the top 10 cards of your library, then remove any number of them from the game and put the rest back on the top of your library in any order. If Ancestral Knowledge leaves play, shuffle your library. So the goal here, it enters the battlefield, you get rid of all the pesky lands that you're going to run into during your storm turn, and you can kind of set up your library enchantment, maybe land a land, so you draw the land, cast the land, and then the land is going to get the other land off the top of your library. So you're able to just set up your turn, and you need to cast the spells in certain order to kind of just, ensure that you're triggering your commander and your card draw effects. But I will say, it's super fun. You set it up, you go off, and it just gives you amazing card selection, and then it allows you to get rid of all the useless cards at the same time. From there, just being able to look at the top card of our library is going to be very useful. We have Assemble the Players, we have Elven Chorus, and Oracle of Moldiah. All very good cards. Oracle is going to allow us to play 2 additional land cards, which helps us get lands off the top of our library. Lands can kind of be one of the things that hems this deck up. The majority of our deck is creatures or enchantments, so 9 times out of 10, if you're casting an enchantment spell, you're going to trigger your commander. But 30% or over 30% of this deck is lands, so that's going to be something we have to deal with, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, but Oracle of Moldiah does help us out quite a bit because we can play 2 additional lands with him, and we can play lands from the top of our library. Elven Chorus allows us to tap our creatures for mana, which is very useful, and that comes into play later as well, helps with our storm turn. It also is going to allow us to look at the top card of our library and play creature spells, so synergizes with the commander as well. Assemble the Players is a little bit less good, but 9 times out of 10 we really just want the ability to look at the top card of our library, and then it does allow once per turn to cast a creature spell with power 2 or less from the top of our library, which is going to be the majority of our creature spells in this deck. So again, we're casting spells from the top of our library, which whenever you're casting a spell from the top of your library, it's kind of like you drew that card and then casted it from your hand, so it is card advantage in a way, and it does just synergize with the commander. Last but not least, the best one is One with the Multiverse. Now this is 8 mana, but it's not hard for a Enchantress deck to get to 8 mana. If you guys have played enchantment strategies before, you already know that's true. And then it's an enchantment that says you may look at the top card of your library anytime, you may play lands and cast spells from the top card of your library, and then once during each of your turns you may cast a spell from your hand or the top of your library without paying its mana cost. Notably insane with Nexus of Fate, because remember, Nexus of Fate is another 7 CMC spell, so being able to cast Nexus of Fate from the top of our library to get that extra turn, and the Nexus of Fate shuffles itself back into the library, it kind of becomes a mini game. Like, how many spells do I have to cast before I find my next Nexus of Fate? And then you just kind of go off, cast your Nexus of Fate, go to your next turn after dealing a ton of damage to your opponents, and then try again. Not the most fun to play against, but super fun while you're playing it. Sylvan Library also seemed like a no-brainer. At the beginning of your draw step, you get to draw 3 cards instead, and then you can either pay life to keep all of those in your hand, or you can put them back in any order. So it's just another way you can kind of manipulate the top of your library to ensure that you're going to trigger your commander. Now, I alluded to this earlier, but lands getting stuck on the top of our library is a problem. So how are we going to counteract that? One way is Ashaya. Now that all of our creatures are lands, and the majority of our creatures are also enchantments, you cast a creature spell, and it's going to count as a land, a creature, and an enchantment. So the odds that you go ahead and trigger your commander are very, very high in that scenario. Ashaya also allows us to tap our creatures for mana, which is going to help us storm off, but more on that later. The next one is Composer of Spring. Composer of Spring says whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. If you control 6 or more enchantments, instead put any creature or land from your hand onto the battlefield. So this is kind of a way we can just cheat lands into play whenever we're casting those enchantment spells. So if one gets stuck on top of our library, we still cast the enchantment enters, we trigger Composer of Spring first, cheat a land into play, trigger our commander, get the land, put it into our hand, and then we can trigger our commander a second time for the enchantment and hopefully put an enchantment into our hand. So there's a lot of top deck manipulation that just kind of comes into play here, and Composer of Spring can help us get those lands off the top of our library. Another one is Peerless Foyers. This is a 5 CMC enchantment that says sacrifice a creature, search your library for a land card with a basic land type, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. That's just a solid shuffler that puts a land into play. What's very important about Peerless Foyers is it says basic land type. So that doesn't mean basic lands. That means a land that has either forest, plains, or island typings, which we are on a lot of in this deck. Now, before we get onto the win cons, let's talk about how this deck is able to consistently cast spell after spell and storm off trying to find that Nexus of Fate. The first thing is we enable our creatures to tap for mana. So we can use Ashaya, we can use Enduring Vitality, that's an enchantment, Cryptolith Rites, remember we have Elven Chorus, and once we're able to allow our creatures to tap for mana, we need a haste enabler. So Lightning Greaves, Concordant Crossroads, I even put Ulvenwald Oddity in this deck, and once you flip him over, he not only gives all of your creatures +1, he also gives them trample and haste. So now that our creatures have haste, and we have these effects that allow us to tap our creatures for mana, all you need is any of your effects that generate a creature whenever you cast an enchantment spell or whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield. We're on Arcana Sun's Grace, we have Ajani's Chosen. Both of these are a little bit better than the other ones because they trigger on ETB. One, you're going to get a 2/2 cat. The other one, you're going to get a 2/2 white Pegasus creature with flying. Very good because he also gives all Pegasi you control lifelink, which is very, very useful. And then you have Sigil of the Empty Throne along with Hallowed Hauntings. These are a little bit worse because they're on cast instead, but even cast generating creatures are going to be super solid, especially when Hallowed Hauntings generates a creature that has power equal to the spirits you control and it's generating spirit creature tokens. So these are spirits that get progressively bigger and can start being a problem for your opponents. And then Sigil of the Empty Throne just generates a 4/4 white angel whenever you cast an enchantment spell. Now, since we have these effects that are generating creatures whenever we're casting these enchantment spells and these enchantments are entering the battlefield, it's not hard to see how this deck is able to utilize a ton of mana whenever you have these effects that give our creatures haste paired with the effects that allow our creatures to tap for mana. Now you're just able to kind of storm off and cast a ton of spells, and that's where the power of this deck really lies. There are also just synergies that kind of just pop off in this deck and allow you to just go insane. Imagine we have a Shia on the field. This turns all of our creatures into lands, and then we have Stoneseeder Hierophant. Hierophant says whenever a land enters the battlefield, she untaps, and then she has an ability that says untap target land. So if we have our Sanctum Weaver on the battlefield, that allows us to tap for X mana, where X is equal to the amount of enchantments we control. We can kind of tap our Sanctum Weaver for mana, cast an enchantment creature. That enchantment creature is going to allow us to untap our Stoneseeder Hierophant. Our Stoneseeder Hierophant untaps our Sanctum Weaver since it's a land, and we can tap it for progressively more and more mana. And that's where this deck kind of storms off and generates an insane value, almost infinite value in a way. Where this kind of gets hung up is if you ever run out of enchantments to cast or creature spells to cast. But let's be honest, with our commander and all of the Enchantress Presence effects, that is not really going to happen. Stoneseeder Hierophant is also just insane with Ashaya as well, because we are on a lot of enchantments that enchant our lands. So imagine we have a land that taps for 3 mana because we enchanted it with an aura that adds additional mana whenever we tap it for a mana, right? So now you're casting a normal creature spell, you're untapping a land that taps for 3+ mana, and then you're able to tap it for 3 mana and cast another 3 CMC spell. So there's other ways to just kind of add to the storm insanity with this Stoneseeder Hierophant strategy. Another one, Springheart Nantuko. Springheart Nantuko generates a token copy of the enchanted creature. So if we enchant this onto our Sanctum Weaver, and then we have an haste enabler along with a Shia, cast a creature spell, generate a token copy of the Sanctum Weaver, and you're able to tap for increasingly more and more mana again, right? And this is kind of where I like to be in these storm strategies. This takes a lot of value engines to put together, but once you assemble that value engine, no one is stopping you. After that, we just have big mana in the deck. We've got Nature's Will and Bear Umbra. This allows us to untap our lands whenever we deal combat damage to a player. We've got Defiler of Vigor, which allows us to pay life for at least 1 green pip in our mana cost, which can be insane because whenever we do cast a green spell, we're also going to put a 1/1 counter on each creature we control. This makes our board state massive very, very quickly. Nyx Bloom Ancient allows us to add 3 mana to our mana pool, or sorry, triple the amount of mana whenever we tap a permanent for mana. So that's going to be a solid way to storm off. A Realm Reborn is going to be amazing in these enchantment style decks because it allows other permanents you control to add mana to your mana pool. This means we can now tap our enchantments to add mana to our mana pool, which is kind of insane. And then we have Druid's Repository. I think this is an underplayed card. It's a 3 CMC enchantment that says whenever a creature you control attacks, you get to put a charge counter on it, and then you can remove a charge counter on it to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. So in these decks that are generating token after token after token, it's not hard to see where you just attack, add 10 mana to your mana pool, and then continue your storm turn until you find, your extra turn spell and go into your extra turn. Now, let's talk about the cards that just straight up win the game without having to storm off, because since this is an enchantment strategy, we can kind of just do that. We have Nylea's Colossus. This is a 7 CMC creature that says whenever Nylea's Colossus or another enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, you get to double the power and toughness of target creature. Our commander is a 6/6, so you double it once, it's a 12/12, you double it again, it's a 24 power creature, and now it's going to one-shot anybody, plus it has flying. So this on the battlefield will just kill players very, very quickly. You even have Elevere of the Wild Court whenever she enters the battlefield or whenever she attacks. You get to generate a roll token that's an enchantment aura that equips to a creature and gives it +1 for each enchantment you control. It's not hard to see where that's adding a ton of power to the board on every ETB and every attack with Elevere, and then she's also carded advantage because it says whenever enchanted creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you get to draw a card. This is also just insane with Enchanted Evening. Enchanted Evening turns all permanents you control into enchantments. So now when a land enters the battlefield, it's going to trigger our commander, but it's going to be enchantment and lands. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield, it's an enchantment. So imagine you have just 7 lands on the battlefield. That's 7 additional enchantments, and that's going to be insane for your Sanctum Weaver effects. It's going to be insane for your Elevere effects that are buffing all your creatures, and it's going to be insane for your Nylea's Colossus or anything that triggers on an enchantment entering the battlefield. Before I let you go, I just wanted to mention a couple really cool cards in the deck. I'm on Avacyn. Avacyn's just insane in these enchantment strategies that kind of commit a ton to the board. You don't want to pass the turn and walk into a board wipe, so Avacyn's going to protect our entire board state here. I'm also including Fear of Sleep Paralysis in this deck. It's a cool new blue Enchantress Matters kind of card. It says whenever Fear of Sleep Paralysis or another enchantment you control enters, and whenever you fully unlock a room, tap up the one target creature and put a stun counter on it, and then additionally stun counters can't be removed from permanents your opponent's control. So now you're just tapping down their entire board state. Sensei's Divining Top is also just super cool with Enchanted Evenings, because now Sensei's Divining Top is an enchantment, so it triggers all of your enchantment entering the battlefield effects, and then again it triggers your commander for artifact. We put it back on top and it still does the thing where it draws itself, so it is really good at getting lands off the top of your library as well. This deck just kind of churns once you get Sensei's Divining Top, and again I really wanted to utilize it in a way that seemed a little bit more fair than just infinitely drawing your entire library, so this definitely seems like a happy medium. You need a lot of pieces on the battlefield to make it go infinite with Sensei's Divining Top now, because you need something that generates a creature whenever you cast an enchantment spell, or sorry, whenever an enchantment spell enters the battlefield. Then you need a haste enabler, then you need a way to tap that creature for mana, and then you can go infinite with Sensei's Divining Top. It's not just one cost reducer, you kind of just get there. With that being said, guys, I hope you enjoyed the deck tech. I will see you guys in the next one. As always, I hope you're having a great day.